Are you trying to impress the server, or are you just admiring yourself? Marcus's voice cut through the restaurant's background noise like a blade through silk. I held my black credit card steady in my hand, its titanium edge gleaming under the warm, suspended lights. I hadn't even given it to the server yet, and the table was already filled with muffled snickers. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed smugly, while his fiancée, Cassandra, giggled into her wine glass. "Mom, seriously?" He added, "It's fine. You don't have to put on this show every year." This wasn't a show. It was my birthday dinner. The server took the card from my outstretched hand with practiced ease, though I saw his eyes briefly dart to Marcus and then back to me. A look of polite confusion, a flicker of hesitation. I sipped my coffee and waited. We were seated in a secluded alcove near the back of the dining room. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. Just enough privacy for an intimate gathering and just enough space for everyone to freely pass judgment. Marcus tapped his fingers on the table as if keeping time with the rhythm of his own self-importance. "Maybe your little annuity has reached its limit," he muttered, not so quietly that the others couldn't hear. The card was declined. The server returned, his face taut, his voice hushed. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the card did not process. Would you like to try another?" The atmosphere shifted. I felt it before I heard it. A little gasp from Cassandra, a snort from Marcus, the tense silence from the rest. My daughter-in-law-to-be leaned in toward Marcus. "Oh, God, this is so mortifying." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. But something inside me, something deep and long suppressed, fractured. All I had wanted was a quiet meal. My kids, their significant others, a candlelit table, something warm and simple. I had even suggested a cozy bistro in my neighborhood, nothing fancy, just a familiar spot. But Marcus had insisted. He claimed I deserved something refined, and then booked the most lavish steakhouse in the city center, a private wine room, a 5-course tasting menu, imported dishes I could barely pronounce. I said nothing, even though I recognized the logo on the menu. I helped design it 8 years ago when the restaurant chain first expanded to the East Coast. I consulted on their launch strategy, reviewed their floor plans, and redesigned their server workflows. The general manager back then shook my hand and said, "You made this place run with flawless precision." But my son had no idea, none of them did. To them, I was just Mom, the widow in comfortable shoes who still used coupons, the woman who clipped articles from newspapers and carried hard candies in her purse. A retiree, a relic, sweet, harmless, a little naive. They had chosen that version of me, and I had allowed it. After my husband's death, I juggled 3 jobs just to keep the house. I cleaned offices at dawn, handled vendor calls during the day, and arranged small weddings on weekends. I remember arriving home once with my shoes completely soaked and my fingers covered in blisters from carrying floral crates. Marcus was asleep on the sofa, his college acceptance letter resting on the coffee table. I sold my wedding ring that week and paid his first semester's tuition in full. I never told him. He simply said, "Thanks, Mom," and then asked if I would co-sign his lease. I did it, quietly. Always quietly. Now he sat across from me, full of bluster and pride, mocking my existence as if it were a performance, as if I had never built a single thing, as if I hadn't given him the world with both hands, asking for absolutely nothing in return. "You don't need to keep up the pretense," Marcus said, his arms crossed as if settling in for a lecture. "We can cover you. Just admit it already." The words didn't hurt. They just settled like dust on old wounds. I looked at him, not as the man he was now, but as the little boy who'd used to tug on my sleeve at the grocery store, asking if we could afford real orange juice this week. Now he was offering to cover me. Cassandra leaned in with that forced, tight smile she always wore at family gatherings. "Mom, there's no disgrace in asking for help. Maybe it's time to speak with someone about managing what you have." What I have. I had nearly 200 employees across 3 states. I had booked 10 Fortune 500 galas this year alone. I had audited accounts that made Cassandra's combined salary look like a hobby. But I remained silent because what was more painful than their ignorance was the absolute certainty with which they held it. Marcus chuckled under his breath. A black card, Mom. Seriously? His fiancée snorted. Maybe it came from one of those junk mail scans. The tension thickened. I could feel the server lingering just out of sight, unsure whether to approach or disappear. A server cart rattled slightly as it rolled past. I met the server's gaze. Would you be kind enough to ask your manager to come to our table? Marcus blinked. Why? So you can complain about the fake card to the corporate office? I didn't respond. I simply took a sip of my water and placed the card gently back in my wallet. Miles, the manager, had once emailed me after midnight for help with a last-minute event crisis. I had stayed up all night, reworking the entire schedule, and sent him a complete solution before dawn. He had called me a magician. I hadn't heard from him since. The kitchen door opened and I saw him step out, adjusting his blazer and scanning the room. I slowly folded my napkin, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Miles didn't walk. He hurried. I saw the panic in his eyes before he reached our table, the kind of panic that comes from realizing you have mishandled a truly important person. He arrived and immediately gave a slight bow. "Miss Miller," he said, out of breath, "I am so sorry for the confusion. Your card was flagged by our system because we still owe you over $500,000. Our accounting department placed a hold on your account. We can't process charges from clients we are financially indebted to." The ensuing silence was absolute. No clinking glasses, no smug laughter, not even Marcus's fingers tapping anymore. Miles adjusted his tie. It was a back-end system error. The unpaid catering balance for the Marcus Group Gala, the state delegates' lunch, and the Foundation Summit, it's all still pending. Please forgive us. I nodded once. I understand. No harm done. Miles offered a tight, embarrassed smile and stepped back. The moment he was gone, I turned to my water glass. No one spoke. Even the server, bless him, just stood awkwardly at the edge of the table, unsure whether to pour the wine or simply vanish. I looked at Marcus. His mouth was slightly agape. Cassandra stared at me as if I had just shed a disguise. My daughter-in-law-to-be blinked rapidly, her cheeks flushed. Did he just say they owe you? Marcus's voice was thin. They do, I replied calmly, dabbing the corner of my napkin with my napkin. It happens sometimes when a vendor forgets to process large payments. How large is large? Cassandra asked again, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it again. Over $500,000 for now, I said. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at me. They just stared at the table, the cloth, the remnants of the main course growing cold in front of them. I thought you were retired, Marcus finally mumbled. I never said that, I replied serenely. You just assumed I had nothing left to build. And with that, I reached for my glass again, knowing the questions would come faster than they were ready to hear the answers. I run Miller & Vaughn, I said, watching their faces carefully. We designed the branding and event logistics for this entire restaurant chain. Marcus blinked hard. Wait, what? I've been working behind the scenes for over a decade, I continued. Grand openings, investor dinners, corporate launches. Every room you've walked into that made you feel like someone had truly thought it through, that was my team. He scoffed. You never said anything. I raised an eyebrow. I did. You just weren't listening. You called it a weird side hustle and said I should consider retirement before it's too late. Cassandra looked at me as if I were a stranger. You're saying you built this? I built a company that built this, I clarified. We handle luxury event production for state departments, corporate giants, museum galas. We plan logistics that are seen by millions and remembered by a select few who truly matter. My daughter-in-law-to-be cleared her throat. But you never posted about it. Never shared links? No interviews? I nodded. No Instagram, no TED Talks, no newsletters. I built quietly, intentionally. Derek, Marcus's friend, who had joined late and remained silent until now, finally spoke. Miller & Vaughn. I saw that name on the UN Gala brief last year. I turned to him. We did that one. A $12 million budget, 48 hours of live transitions, 0 errors. Marcus leaned back, as if the air had been knocked out of him. You've been doing all this while we thought you were just clipping grocery coupons? I was clipping coupons, I said with a smile. Just because I can afford caviar doesn't mean I enjoy wasting money. Forbes had featured us once, buried in their mid-year review of female-owned logistics firms. I didn't frame it. I didn't bring it to family dinner. I didn't want their admiration to be conditional on a press release. You thought you just did flowers? Cassandra said, barely above a whisper. I looked at her. I design experiences. I employ over 200 people. And until 5 minutes ago, not a single one of you had the faintest idea who I really am. Marcus opened his mouth, but what came next didn't surprise me. When Cassandra was 13, she fell off her bicycle and cracked a tooth so badly the nerve was exposed. The insurance wouldn't cover the full procedure, and the dentist needed upfront payment for the emergency surgery. I paid in cash. No questions, no delay, no thanks expected. She was back in school 2 days later, smiling as if nothing had happened. She still doesn't know I returned a winter coat I had saved up for just to cover it. When Marcus got his first job in Boston, he called me in a panic. The landlord needed a security deposit by noon, or the apartment would go to someone else. I was already on a video call with a European client, troubleshooting a logistical catastrophe for a climate summit. I muted my microphone, logged into my account, and wired the full amount within 7 minutes. When I called him back, he said, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I told him to go celebrate. He never asked where the money came from, never wondered if it had cost him anything. For years, I ate leftovers while on Zoom calls with global investors. I answered emails from the break room of a conference center while sipping weak office coffee. I wore discount store blazers so I wouldn't stand out too much when I picked them up from college. I let them believe I was doing fine. Maybe a little frugal, maybe a little old-fashioned. They called me humble, quiet, safe. But I wasn't safe. I was powerful. And now that power sat at the table with them, unapologetic, undeniable, and confusing. Marcus kept stealing glances at me, as if trying to assemble a puzzle that had been in front of them all along. "You really built something huge," he murmured. "I built a life," I said. "I just didn't ask for applause while doing it." For the first time all evening, no one had anything clever to say. Even the silence felt different, more cautious, more curious. And then Cassandra said what I'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to ask. Marcus's fiancée hadn't uttered a word in 10 minutes. She was hunched over her phone, scrolling furiously, her expression flickering between confusion and disbelief. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "Miller and Vaughn. Oh my God." Marcus leaned in, peering at her screen. "What is it?" She turned the phone toward him. I caught a glimpse of my company's website, clean, polished, and professional, with a rotating carousel of black tie events and grand halls glowing with chandeliers. "Mom," Marcus looked at me slowly, carefully. Are you rich?" I didn't laugh. I didn't roll my eyes. I just met his stare and said, "I'm stable, I'm successful, and I'm not ashamed of it." He nodded once, stunned. His confidence, that casual bravado he wore like cologne, had begun to falter. Cassandra was the next to speak, her voice soft. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I would have believed you if I had?" I asked gently. They didn't answer. Then the questions began. Hesitant, awkward, a bit defensive. "Wait, how long have you had the company? Do you actually plan those celebrity events? Wait, were you at the Met Gala last year?" I answered only what I felt like answering, nothing more. I didn't gloat. I didn't recount figures or flaunt my status. I just let the truth fill the space they had once reserved for pity. When the server returned to clear the plates, I reached into my purse and handed him a crisp business card. "Please apply this dinner against the outstanding vendor credit with my company." He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yes, Miss Miller." The manager appeared seconds later. "Everything is settled, respectfully, and thank you again for all you've done with our national rollout." I nodded, My pleasure. And then they were gone. The plates cleared, the check vanished. My children sat stunned around the table, the conversation now theirs to restart if they could find a new tone for it. Marcus stared at the polished wood for a long beat, then finally said, "I had no idea." I tilted my head slightly. "That part I know." Cassandra leaned in, her voice low. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The same eyes that once stared up at me from a hospital bed with gauze packed in her mouth, terrified about missing the school recital. The same girl who used to draw me flowers on sticky notes and tape them to the fridge. "Because you," I said slowly, "you were happier thinking I needed your help than knowing I didn't." Her face softened. "That's not true." "It is," I said, not harshly, just honestly. "You were all more comfortable believing I was simple, safe, dependent. Anything else felt disruptive." She looked away, blinking faster. "I didn't want your awe," I continued. "I wanted your love as mom, not as someone to compete with, not as someone to resent. Just me." The tears came, quiet and unwelcome. I dabbed them away before they could fall. I had trained myself for years not to cry in front of clients, but this wasn't a boardroom. This was worse. This was family. Marcus cleared his throat. I guess I owe you an apology. I didn't mean to." He trailed off, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "You thought I was making it up," I offered. He gave a sheepish nod. I let the silence sit for a second before I said, "I've forgiven you, but I haven't forgotten." He nodded, looking down at his empty glass. "Fair." I turned to Cassandra. She reached across the table and took my hand. "She feels like I'm meeting you for the first time," she said.
"You're not," I replied. "You're just seeing what I never forced you to see." Across the room, the lights dimmed slightly as dessert courses were quietly served at other tables. The evening was winding down, but something in our corner had only just begun to shift. I took a slow breath, then said, "There's one more thing I'd like to share with you all tonight." The waiter returned with dessert, petite cakes adorned with spun sugar, plated like works of art. No one touched them. I cleared my throat gently. "Actually," I said, setting my napkin aside, "I came here for more than just my birthday." Marcus looked up, his brows furrowed. "I booked the rooftop lounge upstairs, just for us. It's for your father." The silence returned, but this time it was heavier, layered with something closer to shame than shock. "Today's the anniversary," I said. 15 years. I didn't want it to pass in awkward glances and uncomfortable silence. Cassandra placed her fork down. "You remembered?" "Of course I did. He was my husband, your father, our constant, even when things weren't easy." I watched them absorb it. Their posturing softened, their confusion turning inward. It was like watching them remember who they were before life hardened them. I had my team arrange everything, I went on. Their photos, fresh flowers, his favorite jazz trio, and that plum tart he used to sneak from the bakery on Jefferson Street. No one had known, not one of them had guessed. I wanted this to be a space where we could mourn him together, without pretense, without the noise. Marcus's voice was quieter now. "You did all that?" I nodded. "Not for show, for memory, for him, and for us." The music from the restaurant below drifted upward in faint notes, just enough to remind us that the rest of the world was still spinning. But in that moment, the air at our table stilled. It was never about showing off. It was about remembering who we were before the world made us cruel. Their faces were softer now, Cassandra wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Marcus stared out the window, his jaw tight. Then I stood, reaching for my coat. The elevator to the rooftop is just around the corner. Come if you want, stay if you need to. And with that, I turned toward the hallway, my heels quiet against the marble as I walked away. As I stepped outside, the night air greeted me with the calm coolness. The valet glanced up, caught my eye, and straightened quickly. "Miss Miller, your vehicle will be brought around right away."
Marcus paused beside me, watching me exchange. He didn't speak at first, but I could feel the questions pressing against his tongue. When the ballet disappeared into the side lot, Marcus finally asked, "Why didn't you ever move somewhere nicer, somewhere bigger?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. Because I didn't want my home to be a showroom. I wanted it to be mine. He nodded but didn't reply. I could tell he was still folding that thought into something bigger, something that had little to do with square footage. Cassandra joined us a moment later, her arms wrapped around herself. No one filled the silence, and for once it didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. The car pulled up. The valet opened the door with care, but I paused before stepping in. I turned back toward the building, toward the rooftop, where the trio would be playing softly now, where candles would flicker beside old photographs, where grief and memory would settle together, finally invited. Marcus followed my gaze. "You set all of that up just for tonight?" "For him, and for the version of us that used to remember what mattered." He looked down. "I'm sorry I forgot." I touched his arm lightly. "You didn't forget. You just stopped looking." The lights of the city danced across the windshield. I opened the car door, then paused once more, this time to say something I hadn't planned. "Wealth isn't always loud," I said, turning to face them. "It remembers who laughed." Neither of them replied. They didn't need to. I stepped into the car, letting the door close gently behind me.